is going to be a demonstration on how to create digital prints from a lino cut carved block. So we're going to try to replicate the same process that you would do in an art studio with ink and paper and all of that process, but digitally. So the first thing is to create the paper. So we're going to go new project on photopea.com. You're going to change your dimensions to 8 by 10 and press create. I think it'll give you your white paper. The next thing you're going to do is bring in an image of your plate. So make sure that you've taken a photo as straight on as possible of your plate, a good quality image. And then you're going to go to open and place. If you go to open, it's going to create a new file, but you want to place it within this existing document. The image that I'm using is from a student, a carved plate, a portrait from Canvas. So that's going to load into your document. The next thing that you want to do is crop off any edges of background that exist around the plate in the image you've just imported. So use the rectangular select. I'm going to start down here because it's the straightest edge and drag upward to where I'd like it to end. And then I'm going to right click and select inverse. Now it's not going to let me delete it right now because I need to rasterize this image. So right click over on the layer and click rasterize. Then you can click the backspace button and it's just going to clean up those edges and take out the background. I'm going to go to select deselect to take that part out. Next thing I'm going to do is resize this a little bit so that there's some larger margins. So make sure that that's selected, that layer, and you're going to go to edit, free transform. Now, one of the tips to make sure that you're maintaining your aspect ratio is to press the shift key on your keyboard, and then you can change this. And you want to make it so that replicate sort of the idea that you would have in a print in the studio. So you're going to center it and leave a little bit of extra space on the bottom for a signature. The next thing that we're going to do is try to separate the carved pieces from the raised sections on the plate. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so I can see it a little bit better. And I'm going to go up to select color range. Now there's other ways you can do this as well, but I found this a really simple way to get the students to find those, to reduce those lines and take those out. So I'm going to just click on the color. It's going to select. I'm going to press OK. And then if you press the backspace, it's going to take them out. Now, because there's some really fine lines on here, we're going to have to do it a few times. So you're going to go back up to select color range, and you're just going to take your time and go through, and let's see if press OK, backspace, and continue to clean up the image. Once you put a color into the background, you'll be able to see it a bit clearer about, those different values of gray that are remaining. But you can tell them to just spend a little bit of time going through and finding those values as best you can. And it shows you that you're still finding them, so you can just delete. Continue to delete them. Okay. Now let's center it back and have a look. Okay, so it's pretty good. So the first image I get them to create is a black and white print, and that's the same as I would do in the studio. So very simply, what you can do is, now that you've got a background and then you've got the plate separated, is you can double click on this image here, Move that box off to the side, and you're going to do a color overlay. And you can see very quickly that that prints out nicely there. You're going to change the color to black, press OK, and there is your black on white print. You can see now there's some little gray areas, so again, encourage them to go back in and make sure you're on the right layer. And take some time to clean those up and get a nice clean print. So that once helped. Okay. So fit to area. Now we're going to add our signatures at the bottom. So you can create a text tool. And at the bottom here, on the left, you can go 1/1. In the center, they're going to put their title. And then on the left, they're going to have a signature. You can do those in 3 different text if you'd like to play around with the fonts and have the signature different. But you get the idea here of what that can look like. You can play around here with different fonts and get something more realistic to a signature. So I've selected just the calligraphy one, and you can pick something that looks more like a handwritten. Okay. And use your cursor to move it exactly where you'd like it. And there's the text. Then they will save and export as, so file export as PNG. And press save, and that will save in their files. Now we can get creative with the different styles of print. So there's a few things that you can do here. So the first thing I'm going to do actually is rename this as ink so that I remember that that's the plate. The paper is always going to stay paper. So we can label that as paper. And what we're going to do now is create another layer. And in this new layer, you're going to start to add in various things. So let's say we were doing a chine collé idea and you wanted some sort of a color in behind. So we talked about what chine collé is, and you can select whatever color you think, or we also talked about the idea of printing a blank uncarved plate on your paper, letting it dry, and then printing your plate over top. So you can take that color, and we're going to create using the rectangular tool. And you can just drag it here, watching your edges. And it's going to change that background and create a chine collé idea. Make sure that it's in the correct order, because if it's in the wrong order, then it's going to be in front of your ink. And continue to play around with them very quickly using the color overlay. So we talk about hue, we talk about tinting and shading in your ink, and we talk about the importance of contrast between your ink and your background color. So they can play around with that. It's okay. And again, save as you go. So I require students to do one black and white and then play around with variations. I also talk to students about the idea of how you could create gradients with your ink in the studio, how you would line up more than one color and roll out a gradient. So simple ways to do that in here, you could click on that layer again, and instead of using a color overlay, you could use a gradient overlay. So when you click on here, you could change your colors and get creative with, okay, on one end and on the other end. Make it brighter for contrast. And there we are. So rolling out a gradient in the background. You can change the direction of the gradient and get fancy with that. So we'll save that one and save as they go so that you've got all these prints there. Now we're going to take that background layer out and play around with the colors of inking your plate. So same concept, double click on the ink. You're going to use a color overlay, and they can play around here with different colors of printing their plate. So let's say I like this. I'm going to press OK. And then they can make combinations of these. So they could create a different color in the background here with a different colored ink as well. So you could also create gradients in the ink. So if you double click that layer and instead of a color overlay, you do a gradient overlay and play around with those as well. So I'll show you here, you can change the angle. So if they rolled the plate in a different direction, then you can play with that as well. Press OK. So we'll save that one. The final thing that I talk to students about is the idea that we would encourage them to print on various surfaces and not just white paper when they're in the studio. So they could print on fabric or newspaper or any number of things that they could find. So because we don't have access to those things, we use Google Images. And I encourage them to look for textures because it can get too complex. And if they use an image, then they're going to lose that image and it's going to confuse the plate. But they can get creative with choosing something that suits. So let's try this just for fun. I like that texture. So you're going to save the image. Go back into their Photopea file. And you're going to go to File, Open in Place again. Find the texture. And move it and turn it and resize it to where you would like it. It could become the entire paper, or again, can become sort of a chine-collé idea. Now with textures, the distortion doesn't matter as much, depending on what image you've used. Okay, so you're going to place that, and then you're going to move your ink on top. And then you can see the image there. Now I'm just going to change that ink to just a plain black. And that's finished. So you have some interesting textures coming through in these pieces. And that's it. Thank you for following.